So again, you are welcomed on the webinar called Testing Framework Schrodinger. My name is Kateryna Honchar. I'm a Java developer in Evolveum team. So during this workshop, we'll go through introduction. Then we will talk about how automated testing appeared in MidPoint. Then we will look at Schrodinger structure and capabilities. Also, we will talk about how Schrodinger framework is used in our daily work, and we will look at test environments which are organized for Schrodinger tests running. We will look briefly at our plans for this project, and then we will finish with questions and discussions. So Schrodinger is a tool which is used for automated testing of MidPoint user interface. With the help of Schrodinger framework, we can simulate MidPoint user activities in web browser. And Schrodinger framework is written exactly for MidPoint user interface, so it cannot be used for some another project, but it can be useful for different MidPoint instances testing. So let's talk about how and why Schrodinger appeared. Maybe you have already noticed or already learned that MidPoint is a big project with a huge number of different configuration capabilities. So depending on the configuration of user interface, it can be changed a lot. We can configure the visibility of the pages, or we can configure the visibility of the elements on the page. We can set which kind of search we would like to use in MidPoint project, or which columns to display in the table. But no matter which configuration we have, we would like to keep the user interface stable. And I would say it's almost impossible to do it with manual testing. That is why the idea of automated testing appeared on the MidPoint project. So at first, we tried to write tests using Selenium library, later using Selenite library, but these attempts didn't move forward. And then on the top of Selenite library, a Schrodinger framework was created by our colleague William Ripan. So the code of Schrodinger is adopted for MidPoint user interface. It means that with method call in Schrodinger, you can execute some action with it within MidPoint user interface. For example, you can show user details or add an assignment. Previously, Schrodinger was a part of MidPoint project, but starting from MidPoint 4.3, it was separated to a distinct project. Here you can also see the link to our Schrodinger project. So let's look deeper at the structure of Schrodinger project. Now Schrodinger contains two modules. It's Schrodinger framework itself and Schrodinger tests. So Schrodinger framework is a library which is used to write the automated tests for MidPoint user interface. The structure of classes in this library tries to repeat the structure of the code in admin GUI module of MidPoint project. So if you are familiar with MidPoint GUI code, it would be easier for you to start with tests writing. But even if you are not familiar, hopefully you will find using this Schrodinger library intuitive. So, for example, if you know that there is a list users page in MidPoint project, in MidPoint user interface, then you can easily call list users method in Schrodinger to show the appropriate page. A little bit later, we will look at an example of Schrodinger test. So you will examine how clear it will be. To make Schrodinger framework more fluent and to make it more tester friendly, we created assertion methods for different conditions. As a basis, we used testng assertion class, but we extended it with screenshots. And also we specified the appropriate error messages, which point to a concrete error within MidPoint user interface. So on the example on this slide, you can see a call of assert method. We are opening user details page for Kirk user. We are selecting basic tab. We are taking form element on this tab, and we would like to check milk card number property if it contains the text 1001. So in the case when this assertion will fail, then the tester will receive a message that the value of the input attribute milk card number doesn't contain text 1001. So from this error message, it's clear what has happened. But in the case, if this assertion doesn't fail, the test will run further and you don't need to interrupt your test writing. So you can just continue. Now let's look to the second part of Schrodinger API, to the Schrodinger tests. As automated GUI tests simulate the MidPoint user activity in web browser, the tests can take pretty long time. For example, we are waiting for a page to be loaded, or we are looking for the elements on the page. Sometimes we are opening pop-up windows and make some activities there. So all these actions take time. Some complicated tests with which operate with several resources can take up to 20 or 30 minutes. So to save the time during objects creation in MidPoint or during objects import, we decided to use MidPoint REST API client, another project of Evolveum team. And we decided to add objects to the MidPoint with the REST API client add object service. So if you have a big set of objects to be imported or if you would like to initialize your MidPoint instance with objects, you can use add object from file method, which is located in abstract Schrodinger test class. And there is no need to go to the import object page and to select the file to be imported and so on, and to make other steps through the user interface. So it would be faster and easier. Before running the tests, you can configure the properties. So let's look at them. There is a Schrodinger properties file. I pasted the screenshot of this file from our project, so you can see the default values for these properties. And let's look at them. So as the tests are running over the MidPoint instance, we need to specify the URL where MidPoint is running. So base URL property is responsible for that. We need also to specify the username and password of MidPoint administrator user. As a default, we specify to run tests with Chrome WebDriver. This means that Chrome web browser will be used. And we specify the location of the WebDriver on the local machine. Here in WebDriver property, we can also specify another popular web browsers, such as Opera or Firefox or Internet Explorer. By default, start MidPoint property is set to true. Logically, this means that when we start the tests, MidPoint instance will be started at first, and the tests will be running over it. But if we want to run the tests over the already running MidPoint instance, we can set start MidPoint property to false. And in this case, we need also to specify the property base URL MidPoint already started. So base URL MP already started. So maybe a question can occur. So why do we duplicate these properties for base URL and base URL MP already started? So I can explain. Our Schrodinger framework is used for different test environments. In some of them, we would like to run the tests over already running MidPoint. In another, we would like to start MidPoint at first. So for these purposes, we use these both properties. There is also a possibility to set up the remote WebDriver URL. This option allows us to configure different test environments also on different machines and to run the tests against various web browsers. To make Schrodinger to use remote WebDriver, we need also to specify use remote WebDriver property to true. And the last property to be discussed is headless start. If you want to launch the browser during tests running, you need to set headless start property to false. If you don't want to launch the browser, you need to set it to true. So here I would like to share some tips how to prepare your MidPoint instance before test running. So there are two methods in Schrodinger tests module. They are get extension schema file and get post initial objects folder path. You can override them and you can specify the values here. And then Schrodinger will take the extension schema file and post initial objects before starting MidPoint instance. Schrodinger will copy these files to the MidPoint home folder, and only then it will start MidPoint. So in this case, we can prepare our MidPoint instance to fill it in with objects we need and with extension schema. Here also you can see an example of the resource folder. It's used for the set of tests which are written for advanced training labs, and these tests require as well schema and post initial objects import So you can use that as well. So here is an example of Schrodinger test. And now I would like to start one simple Schrodinger test just to show you how it works. It will take a while because it's starting midpoint right now. So we can look at this piece of code. We are opening users list page, and we are taking table element on it. Then we are taking search, and we are trying to search an object by its name. We input the value, we are update the search, and then we are trying to click by name after the search is done. So on this example, hopefully you see that the code is clear and understandable. So let's look. So midpoint is still starting. Maybe we can switch to the next slide. And when the test gets our breakpoint, it will show it. Okay. So I would like to tell you some words about how Schrodinger framework is used in our daily work. So previously we had one job in Jenkins, which ran Schrodinger tests nightly over the last build of MidPoint project on master branch. But now we are trying to extend the usage of Schrodinger tests, and we are trying to create various testing environments for different sets of tests. So with the help of Kubernetes technology, we create different midpoint instance containers with a different set of objects and with different configuration at the start point. And with the help of Jenkins, we run the jobs over these midpoint instances. So for example, we have a job which runs a set of tests which don't require any preparation before midpoint start. So these tests cover the basic common use cases of midpoint. So now you can see that the tests are starting midpoint, and the tests launch the browser. So I would like probably to finish with this slide. So again, we have different testing environments. So the first one is used for basic common use cases. And in this case, we use local WebDriver. But we have also another jobs in Jenkins and another containers for midpoint instances. So for example, we have again a set of tests for advanced training labs. And in this case, we need to prepare the test environment. So at first, we copy extension schema file and post initial objects files to the appropriate folder in midpoint home. Then we start the midpoint, and only then we start the tests of our already prepared and running midpoint instance. also in this second job, we use remote WebDriver. So we are trying to test MidPoint in different conditions, in different test environments, with different browsers and with different set of objects at the start. So let's return to our test. So now breakpoint stops at this point, and this is a simple test for user creation. So we would like to call a method, an util method, which should create user. So let's go for it and let's look at the browser. So we are opening new user page. Yeah, and this also takes time. We are filling in the attributes for this new user. We are filling in given name, family name, and name. We are saving the page. Oops. And we are getting an error. Okay, so I will start it again. Hopefully it should work now. Let's then continue with our slides. Okay, I cannot do this for the whole page. So let's look at the plans for Schrodinger project. For now, not 100% of MidPoint user interface is covered with Schrodinger code. So we are eager to extend the Schrodinger framework. This means we are trying to cover as much elements as we can. We would like also to cover more MidPoint user interface with tests. And we would like also to extend test environments. So we would like to test MidPoint with different conditions. Let's look at the test again. So I can explain now why the test failed. So most probably, when we ran this test before, it didn't go through cleanup after the test, and this user was in the system in MidPoint. So now when we tried to create the same user one more time, we got an error that this user already exists in MidPoint. But probably you have already seen that that with the help of this Schrodinger test, we can launch browser and we can simulate user activity in MidPoint user interface. So, except this test, that was everything for my today presentation. Maybe we can switch. Here's the test. Let's wait for a while. I think it will be soon started. So here you can also see how Schrodinger opens login page and fill in administrator user credentials and logs into the system. All these actions are made in the before class method. So it's standard for all tests. Now let's look again at how we are creating the user. So now we can see that the user was created successfully. We are going to the list users page again, and now we would like to search for the created user in the table, and we would like to open this user details page and to check the attributes. So let's look at it. We are selecting basic search type, and we are searching for a user with this name. We are going to this details page and we are checking if all attributes are there. So you can see that the test is ended successfully. This means that we created the user, checked the attributes, and everything was okay. So for now, my presentation is ended and it's the right time for your questions. So if you have any, you can ask. So hopefully everything was clear. If no question appeared, or on the contrary, everything was not clear at all. Okay, so I would like to thank you for your time.
Okay. Sorry, I see a question on the chat. Is the example available?
Okay. I don't see it for. Okay. Actually, I don't get the question. Is the example available? What do you mean where it should be available?
I would add to this that the Schrodinger framework is one of the project on the GitHub in Evolveum repository. So everything is available there.
Yeah, so all the tests are free for looking, for learning, for using like an example. Yeah, they are. If there are any other questions? So maybe we can finish then. I would like to thank you again for your time. Hopefully it was interesting and useful for you. And then, bye.